We are continuing on Masechet Sukkah, and we're on Daf Lamed Zayin, Lamed Vav Amud Bet, the top 3 lines of the Amud. We really started the top line, so the 3rd line on top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zechut Refuah Shelema for Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, for Michael ben Nahid, Esther Bracha bat Chaya, and Avraham ben Tajgol. All have Refuah Shelema, Amen. This Amud is also being learned as a Zechut for the families, Shei family, Dayan family, and Cohen families who have graciously sponsored this month's learning of the community. So we started a fascinating topic of what etrogim are kasher and what etrogim are not kasher, and the very interesting Gemara that compared the kashrut of etrogim with that of the kashrut of animals as far as the Isurei Terefa. Now, if an animal has certain blemishes in their health, for instance, the cover of their brain is that krum hamoach, that little thin skin protecting the brain has been damaged, or the lungs have been punctured, or the stomach is damaged and punctured. Some of the terefot could render an animal tarif when they can't last the next 12 months. A terefa lo chayi, the Gemara says, a terefa does not live a full year after it becomes tarif. Now, we have 18 categories of terefa, and the reason I'm saying categories is because the Rambam writes that these 18 terefot the Gemara introduces to us is not just 18 terefot, but rather each one of them is a category of tarif, and it has subcategories underneath them, so you'll end up with an array of different types of health problems that could render an animal tarif. Now, the Gemara compares the etrog with terefa as well, because we have already many similarities between the etrogim that are considered pasul to those of the simane terefa. So therefore, the Gemara asked, if you have an etrog that is saduk is pasul, if it's cracked from top to bottom is pasul. If it's nikav, if it has a hole that goes through and through the entire etrog, it's also pasul. That obviously very much resembles the fact that the Gemara in Chulin says if you have the trachea, the air pipe of an animal that is saduk, it's cracked, all of the rings of the air pipe is cracked from the top ring to the bottom ring, then that animal is tarif, right? Nistak, if you have the kerum of the moach that is through and through, then it will be a problem. Then it would be considered tarif as well, and that would be also a problem. Now the Gemara says, here Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. We said Lamed Vav Amud Bet. That's a mistake. On top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Nistak nikav, if it was cracked, if it was punctured, it's pasul. Tani ula bar chanina or chinina. Nikav nekef mefulash b'mashehu v'sheinu mefulash b'kisa. If it's a nekef that goes through and through, punctures from one side of the throat, comes out from the other side, then it's going to be pasul. Even if it's a minor, tiny little thing, still is going to be pasul. But if it's not mefulash, if it doesn't go through and through, then it's only pasul if you have a nekev ke'isar. It has to be the size of a small coin, and that's when it's going to become pasul. So now the Gemara says, Bai Rava. Rava asks this question: if you have signs of terefa in the etrog, then it's going to be a question. Mahu, what's going to be the din? What is the question? what is the question of the Rava of Simanei Terefa? Says Gemara, Iniklaf, if it's peeled, then it's going to be a Mishnah. We learned it. Niklaf, we learned already that if it's a little bit, it's going to be maybe menumar. If it's in different places, it's going to be a problem. Niklaf kulo, we learned at the very end of the last Amud. So that can't be the question. In Istak, Tanina, if it's cracked, we also learned that, right? Exactly the same thing that we just mentioned right now, that by one of the Simanei Terefa is, if the entire trachea, every little ring of it has been cracked, the animal is tarif. So if that's the one that you're asking, that's siman of tarfut, that also we learned. That nistak, if from the top to the bottom of the etrog, it's cracked, even if it's a crack from one side only, the etrog is pasur. So that can't be the question of Rava either. We're trying to figure out when Rava says, well, I wonder what happens when you have simanei terefa in etrog. Can't be nistak, we learned it. Can't be the niklaf, right? Niklaf by animals, by the way, is what the Gemara says in Masechet Chulin, a gluda. Gluda means if you skinned an animal alive. If you skinned an animal alive, it's not going to live, right? So that's one of the simanei terefa. And says can't be that because we know already etrog she niklaf. It's also learned that's going to be pasul. So these two can't be the question. In nikaf, if the question is when it was punctured, says the Gemara, that can't be either, because Tanina, we learned that as well. Nikav in an animal is if the krum of the moach, the thin layer protecting the brain, was punctured. Now, nikav by us, by etrog, we learned that it's kasher, right? What's the difference? The difference is still very much similar to the terefot of the animals, because by the krum hamoach, by the cover of the brain, the thin layer covering the brain is considered its own thing. So when he has puncture in it, when he has a hole, that hole is considered a hole that's through and through. And therefore it's going to be a problem. It's pasul. We learned if it's a hole that's through and through, even b'mashu is pasul. But if it's not through and through, then it's going to be kasher unless the hole is a big hole. So that also is going to be considered a siman terefa that we already learned. So that can't be the question of Rava either. So going down the list of terefot to find out what exactly Rava is asking. So says the Gemara, excuse me. Kikami bayale. The question of Rava is, Kede Ula, like Ula said, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Ula says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Re'ah shenishbecha kekiton, if you have a lung of an animal that went through, basically became water, is rotting away from inside, and inside of the lung became, instead of being like healthy and sturdy and good, it became like watery. The whole thing is like a sack of water. So that is going to be a siman of paslut, a siman terefa as well. So re'ah shenishbecha kekiton, if the re'ah became like a sack of water, inside of it became liquefied, it's kasher, but it has a very serious condition attached to it. Ve'amar Rava vehu dekaima simfonaha. It has to be at the very least that the simfonaha, the tubes that go inside, right? I think it's called bronchi and the big ones, the two ones, when the trachea comes inside, it becomes bronchi, and then the smaller ones also have a similar name. So those pipes, those tubes are already intact. If they also went bad, then the whole thing is going to be pasul. But we have a re'ah, we have a lung in an animal that the inside of it has been liquefied, so long as the tubes are intact, the animal is kasher because it could regenerate and become healthy again, and that's not considered tarif. Now, what would be the equivalent of this in etrog? If you have an etrog that the outside of it is good, but the inside is become mushed, right? It became liquefied. Is that kasher or is that pasul, right? It's actually, you think that this is very hard to find. I'll tell you an example of how it could be. There is a whole machloket whether or not a frozen etrog is kasher or not. So why is this important? Because I actually did this years ago, one year when it was Shnata Shemitah. And Shnata Shemitah is very hard to use etrogim from Eretz Yisrael, becomes questionable without getting into the details of why it is complex and so on. So what I did was I had a beautiful, gorgeous etrog the year before, which was completely nice and beautiful at the end of Chag HaSukkot. So I was like, next year anyways, I'm going to try to find a etrog from Chutz La'aretz. Back then was the California. Moroccan was not, from Morocco was not really a thing back then yet. But it was etrog in California. And so I'm going to try to get one of those. But in any case, I'm going to keep this beautiful etrog frozen until next year. So I safeguarded, did the whole airtight wrapping and so on, and put in the freezer for a whole year, right? And sure enough, took it Erev Sukkot, or morning of Sukkot, I don't remember exactly. Morning of Chag HaSukkot, I took it out, and it looked like exactly when I put it back in a year ago. It was nice, beautiful etrog, and so I happened to actually get my hands on a etrog from Chutz La'aretz anyways, but I had it. So I said the bracha on the new one, I did the old one as well. After the frozen ice basically recovered, the whole thing became like a mush. Inside of it was completely destroyed by freezing and defrosting. So something like that. The outside was nice, right? The inside was completely ruined. So what do you do with that? Now, obviously, very quickly, the outside became brown as well because that acidic juice also frozen had popped. But nevertheless, for that few hours of the beginning of the Chag, the etrog looked like a gorgeous etrog still before everything broke loose. But that would become this question: if you have inside of the etrog that went bad, right, rotted away, but outside looks good, right? Is that kasher or is that pasul? That's the question of Rava, says the Gemara, because we have this siman of terefa that if the lungs have liquefied, but the bronchies and bronchiolites, the tubes inside are still healthy, that's kasher. So do we say that by etrog also should be like that? Or do we not say that? So says the Gemara. Let's try to figure it out. What's the dilemma? The dilemma is like this. Hachamai, by etrog, what's the din? Dilma hatam, maybe we could say that by the lungs, the reason that's kasher is because it's not exposed to the air. Yeah, obviously the lungs breathe the air in, but it's very limited, and it's covered and protected by the body, right? And it could recover, it could regenerate, and become healthy again. So it's sick, and it's going to become better again, right? Going to become great again. But here, over there by the re'ah, there's no outside air that this is exposed to, and therefore it's going to be recovering and regenerating. Hadar Barya, it goes back to its health. But here, if it's exposed to all the elements outside, it's going to become just worse and worse. It's going to completely rot away. Seruchi masrachat, it's going to be completely rotting away, or dilma loshena, or maybe there's no difference. Maybe both the long of an animal, the siman terefa, and the etrog are completely the same. So just like over there, if the outside is good, inside is bad, it's still kasher. Here also it should be that if outside is good and inside is bad, it should be kasher. That's the question of Rava. And we could understand now why he was scratching his head. It's like, well, that's a good question. The rest of the things, the simanet terefa, we have it already in a Braita or in a Mishnah, so therefore it's not a question. Now the Gemara is going to try to attempt to bring a raya one way or another. Says the Gemara, Tashma, etrog tafuach saruach kavush shaluk. This is a list that the Gemara is going to actually discuss right after this attempt to discuss every one of these interesting scenarios of etrog. So the Braita says etrog tafuach and saruach. Tafuach and saruach, both of them mean is rotting away, right? So etrog that's rotting away, kavush if it's pickled, shaluk if it's cooked, kushi if it's an Ethiopian black etrog, lavan if it's white, menumar if it's spotted, pasul. All of these list of etrogim are pasul. And the Gemara says, wait a second. Why do you have to tell me tafuach and saruach? Tafuach and saruach are synonymous, right? So why do you have to say tafuach and saruach? Must be, you're telling me that one of them is from outside, one of them is from inside, right? That's maybe what you're trying to say, right? Now, before we get to this, let's finish the list of the Braita. The Braita says, etrog kakadur, a etrog that's round like a ball. Usually etrog is not round, right? It has a nice etrog shape to it. If it's mamash round like a ball, it's also pasul. V'yesh omrim afatiyom, and there are those who say even a Siamese etrog is considered pasul. That means two etrogim that grew attached together like Siamese twins, right? That also there are those who say it's pasul. Etrog haboser, if you have an etrog that has not been ripened properly, Rabbi Akiva poser. Rabbi Akiva says it's pasul. Chachamim says it's kasher. Fine. Gadlu bedefus. If you ripened an etrog in a frame, that means when the etrog was tiny, you put like a frame of a star. Now you have a etrog that looks like a star, right? Or whatever frame that you had. You put it in a thing of a box, and now it looks like a cube, right? It's not the natural look of a etrog. You'll be surprised, actually. In Far East, people do this is like a business. That they certain fruits, they put them in a diffuse, and they sell them in the market as different shapes. It's funny to watch, but it looks nothing like the fruit that it would be without the diffuse. So if you did that to etrog, right, and now you have like a box as an etrog, it's going to be also pasul. If it looks like a different creature, then it's pasul. So this is the full Braita, with many different categories of etrogs discussed in the Braita, which we're going to come back to these items of each one of them being discussed halachically, what the status is. But the very beginning of the Braita, the two first words, it's etrog, tafuach, vesaruach. So says the Gemara, katani miyad, however you slice this, it says tafuach vesaruach, which both mean it's rotten. My love tafuach mi bachus vesaruach mi bifnim. Why wouldn't we suggest that what the Braita is saying, that in order for the etrog to be pasul, it has to be tafuach mi bachutz vesaruach mi bifnim. It has to be rotten both in the outside and in the inside, right? And that would suggest that if you have something that outside looks gorgeous and inside is, liquefied and saruach, it would still be kasher. Mara says no. Both of them are talking about rotten from outside. If it's rotten from inside, it will be good. Only the outside is a problem. Inside should be good. V'lo kasha. In other words, if you suggest that etrog tafuach vesaruach is a problem, you will be saying that if tafwach is from outside, if it's rotten from outside, it's a problem. Saruach, it's mibifnim. If it's saruach mibifnim, it's a problem. But I says, no. Tafwach and saruach, both of them are from outside. If it's only on the inside and you don't see anything on the outside, it will be good. Says Marav lo kashya. Had the tafach afal gav delo sarach, had the sarach afal gav delo tafach. According to Rashi, this is, if water from outside penetrated, if it's tafach afal gav delo sarach, the Braita is just telling you that if it's one but not the other, still is going to be pasul. But both of them are pasul, right? Tafach afal gavdelo sarach, sarach gavdelo tafach. If it's one of them is when it becomes rotten in a natural process of rotting away, and the other one is if manually, it was put in water, whatever it was, the outside became rotten, not in a natural process of rotting away, but it was caused by you, right? But both of them are talking about the outside. So far we managed to say if the inside only is a problem, if the inside is rotting away, but outside is intact and nice, should be kasher. Right? So says the Gemara, Amar Mor. We learned etrog kushi pasul. An Ethiopian etrog is pasul. Happens to be also black, right? The Gemara says, wait a second. Tanya kushi kasher. So you can't say that because a different Braita says that etrog kushi is kasher. The Gemara says no. Dumya le kushi pasul. If it looks like an etrog kushi is pasul, the actual Ethiopian etrog is kasher. But if it looks like it, why is the difference? Because if you are in Ethiopia or surrounding areas, as we'll see, then this is a natural etrog. This is how etrog grows there. It's not considered an anomaly. But if you have a California etrog that usually is like yellow, goldish yellow, and nice and beautiful, and all of a sudden, this tree that has all these golden, nice etrogim, all of a sudden it has a black etrog. That black etrog is not a normal etrog, right? Whereas if you have a place that all of the etrogim are like that, that is considered the normal growth of that species of etrog in that place. And if it passes for all the other checklists of etrog, it will be kasher. Therefore, etrog that's kushi mamash, which is the natural growth of this etrog, is like that, kasher. But etrog that you have in a place that's not supposed to look like a etrog kushi, it's domele kushi. It looks like a etrog kushi when it's not a real etrog kushi. That has gone out of its boundaries of norm, and that would be pasul.
Does Hadar go based off where you are?
Well, the Hadar does go based on what it's considered a nice etrog in that species. If you're in Ethiopia and these are your etrogim, right? This is a natural color of etrog. Now, obviously, within that you'll have Hadar, but to say that this is not Hadar because it looks weird, it doesn't look weird. It's not. It's a normal etrog in this place. The poskim actually write. We think that this is crazy. But really, the poskim write this when discussing the Moroccan etrogim. Moroccan etrogim are green, right? They're not gold yellow, right? None of them are. Naturally they're not. They're light green. They're not dark green kekarti necessarily, but they are green. So green is not al-khatchila. It's not. It should be a golden yellow. So how is it that many people lechatchila go and spend hundreds of dollars to buy a Moroccan etrog? Well, the reason they do it is because they believe this being in the forests of Morocco, it has not been tampered with, it has not been grafted, it has not been genetically engineered and modified, and therefore it's better to use it. But the way they deal with the fact that it's green is all of the Moroccan etrogim are this color. all of them are green. All of them are this color. And therefore, the color of green does not indicate a psul because it's the norm, right? So therefore, it's not a psul of hadar, right? So it says the Gemara, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Kitana nami matnitin, dome lekushi. Our Mishnah also is talking about dome lekushi. It's not real kushi. It's not real Ethiopian. Real Ethiopian would be kasher. This is dome lekushi, which means it looks like it, but it's not really kushi. Says the Gemara. Tanan, we learned. Rava Amar, lo kasher. Rava says it's not a problem. Halan v'halahu. This is for us, the Bnei Bavel, and Halehu for Bnei Eretz Yisrael. Us, Bavel, we live next to Ethiopia, right? It's very close. Eretz Yisrael is maybe different, is farther. I don't know exactly how the geography of that works, but says we are used to it. We are, living the surrounding areas, but they don't, and therefore it will be a problem for them, but it would not be a problem for us. Right? Rashi says, "Leolam matnitin." This is the third wide line. Kushina mi pasil. Says the Mishnah really holds that even a real etrog kushi is pasul, not like we said before. Right? We said real kushi is kasher, domele kushi is pasul. The Rava says no. Could be that matnitin exactly means what it says. That the Ethiopian etrog is pasul. But it's not a problem. V'lo kasha. Matnitin libnei Eretz Yisrael. The Mishnah is talking about, what was the Mishnah written? In Eretz Yisrael, right? The Matnitin is talking about Bnei Eretz Yisrael, that they're far from Ethiopia, and therefore, Einam regilim bahem. They're not used to seeing this black, weird-looking etrog. But by Braita, the Braita is talking about Bnei Bavel, shkrovim lekush, they're close to Ethiopia. V'regilim bahem, they're used to seeing these types of etrogim, umekol makom, begadel kan v'domeh lekushi, nidme lehu upasul. And therefore, if it grows here, still it will be pasul for them, even for Bnei Bavel, because that has changed from what it's supposed to be. So therefore, according to Rava agrees with the chiluk that we said before, that if you have a California etrog and it grows black, that would be pasul, because it has deviated from what a norm of its tree should be. So that's one halacha. And the second halacha is the actual Ethiopian etrog for Bnei Eretz Yisrael would be pasul also, because for them, they've never seen such. They're not used to seeing a etrog like this. They look at this, they say, what is this? Well, you colored it. It was weird. But by us, it will be normal. The same thing would be, again, for those who have not seen, let's say in Eretz Yisrael, the same applies to much of the Teimani etrogim. They also look different. And when you hadn't seen them coming from the Ashkenazi communities, you say, what is this? That little pitom, it's green, right? But if you're used to it, the Sfaradim, especially the Temani, will look at you and say, what do you mean? This is the authentic etrog my great-grandfather 5,000 years ago was, that's too much, would be taking this etrog, and that would be a norm versus something that comes out of the norm. Bezrat Hashem will discuss the next pieces of this bright time in the days to come.